English channel testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, English channel testing, testing, okay. English channel testing, testing 1, 2, 3. English channel testing, testing 1, 2, 3. 好，测试。
老师，那你直接帮我讲一下话。
Beyond carbon fees, next steps in carbon pricing, Thailand, Japan, Korea, carbon pricing mechanisms forum.
老师的一些
好。
1、2、1、2、3、1、2、3，没有。 现场的来宾，大家早安。那个从那一头。
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't registered yet, please come to the registration counter for registration. Thank you.
各位现场的来宾，
distinguished guests, people joining us online. Our event will begin in 5 minutes. Just a reminder, no food and drinks are allowed in this venue. If you want to drink water, you can go straight outside the exits and you can go past the registration table. The restroom and the water fountain are all there. Also, just a reminder, if you haven't registered yet, please register. Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, people joining us online, our event will begin in 1 minute.
位现场来宾，
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We will now begin our event. First of all, thank you very much for coming to this forum. This forum is organized by Environmental Rights Foundations and TCAN. It is a discussion on Taiwan, Japan, and Korea carbon pricing. We want to talk about the next steps in carbon pricing. For this forum, we want to remind everyone, first of all, that no food and drinks allowed in this venue. If you want to drink water or food, please go to the venue across the hall, and also the restroom is over there. So this topic is about the carbon pricing in Taiwan, Japan, and Korea. Carbon fees in Taiwan was actually officially launched last year in January 1st, and we finally received our first fee, and Taiwan finally become a carbon pricing country. Now, I've been involved in carbon reduction for many years, and I feel that two things are very, very important. They are critical. First of all, of course, we need to accelerate in development of renewable energies and to phase out fossil fuels. That's the most important thing. Second, but also equally important, that is carbon pricing mechanism. Why is it carbon pricing and renewable energy are equally important? Because with carbon pricing mechanism, we then can allow people who actually has high carbon emissions to really have the financial incentives to take the initiatives and reduce carbon emissions. In the past, environmental protection organizations have been advocating a lot towards those high commissioners. The government also try to subsidize and encourage these companies, these high emission companies, to reduce their carbons. However, the results have not been very ideal so far. But this year, with carbon fees, you will start to see a significant improvement. I would like to share with you two numbers. Of course, first of all, we expect that by 2030, if all the companies can actually follow their own determined carbon emission, we are able to actually reduce carbon by 47 million tons of CO2. That's actually a very significant number, because these 47 million compared to our reduction by 2030, that is our expected goal by 2030. It means that we've already will be achieving 60% with the self-determined carbon reduction plan. So carbon fee alone is actually contribute for 60% of our total goal, which is very effective. And these carbon emissions actually come from those high commissioners. So carbon fees and carbon pricing mechanisms has a significance. You see immediate results, and only because of that, the companies feel the burden, feel the higher cost. That's why they will take active actions to reduce carbon. It's a very important system and mechanism. Also, I want to add another information, that is the Ministry of Environment shared with us that through self-determined reduction plan and carbon fees, companies of course need to invest, and these investments are able to actually bring in 700 billion investment in MTD. So this actually creates another result. That is, the companies are using their own money out of their own pocket for investment in carbon reductions instead of subsidies from the government. So we're able to receive around 5 billion, and 2 billion of them would be on carbon subsidies. But I myself feel that carbon fee alone is enough to incentivize the companies to invest from their own pockets to actually reduce more carbon. So I do feel that carbon fee is able to change the mindset of companies. Now that we received our first fee, what's the next step? What's most important about carbon pricing is not staying at this stage. We need to get companies to see a long-term reduction. And this long-term reduction means that companies need to know that if you don't reduce, it's only going to be more expensive in the future. Carbon will only be more and more expensive. So what the problem that we're facing is that how should we design our carbon pricing mechanism so that the companies can foresee that the carbon is only to be more and more expensive in the future? Do we increase the carbon fee? Because this year, of course, is also a timing for reviewing our carbon fee. Do we continue to increase the carbon fee, or do we want to adopt a new mechanism that is a carbon trading mechanism? And I think that's a very important topic that we will discuss in today's forum. So, is carbon fee better or carbon pricing better? Today we're very honored to have two very important speakers. One of them is with us today, Director of Plane 1.5 from South Korea, Yoon Rak Kwon. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming to Taiwan and share with us the experience of South Korea in implementing carbon trading for 10 years. And you can see that the topic that they share with us is actually quite strong. So we look forward to the lessons from Korea's ETS. Another very important speaker today, of course, is our speaker from Japan, Dr. Kimiko Hirata, Executive Director of Climate Integrate from Japan, who is going to join us online. She's going to share with us the current carbon pricing mechanism discussions in Japan, and it's a very important inflection point in Japan and how she observes the carbon pricing mechanisms in Japan. Next, without further ado, we also want to invite a very distinguished guest here with us. I hope that he can stay till the end to listen to the experience from South Korea and Japan. So, without further ado, a round of applause, not just to welcome him to the stage, but also to thank the efforts of Ministry of Environment. Thank you for powering through and actually launching the carbon fee system. A round of applause to thank and also welcome Minister of Environment, Peng Qiming.
文凭也可以切上去了，好吗？谢谢。
Thank you. First of all, thank you, the moderator, and thank you. I see a lot of friends from the NGOs, TCAN, Environmental Rights Foundations, and also Citizens of the Earth. I'm very happy to be here on behalf of the government. I think my slides is in the next slide. I actually prepared slides. Did you receive my slides? All right. I have to say that in the past 2 years, implementing carbon pricing in Taiwan has been very hard work. I myself actually review the effort. I'm actually more of a market person. So I think in 2014 and 15, I went to the EU and I had a look at the ETS system from Germany. That is, UDA is responsible for the ETS system. I know that back then South Korea was also discussing with Germany and learning more about the ETS system in Germany. But after I became a minister, I found that we're still learning, and yet South Korea have been implemented it for 10 years long. So I know that we have to do it. We can't just talk the talk, we have to walk the walk. So we have been working very hard. First of all, we need to first have a carbon pricing system. So in the past 2 years, we work hard to try to build a system. But in order to receive carbon fee, based on the current system, back then, if it's not because of our hard work. I also want to thank NGOs for your existence, because you do hope that you to have a certain rate and actually have this system in place. But also discussion with the industry is also very important. There are a lot of politicals and commercial power behind, and there are also public opinions of people who don't really know anything about it but have an opinion about it. And you need to persuade your supervisors, and my supervisors do it. So back then I worked very hard to persuade all stakeholders. And I think early this year, even until April or May, when we actually are about to receive carbon fees, someone still asks us to maybe postpone a little bit. That's the actual situation, obstacles we face. Can we go to the next slide? How do we go to the next slide? All right. I have to say, this is the work of the Ministry of Environment. You should be very familiar with us, from environment management, because this is the main core businesses of ministry. It's not just about climate change. There are also, for instance, mosquitoes, rats. They're all falling into the mandate of the ministry. And if you feel that the air quality is bad and all these other things, all those fall into our mandate. But climate change gives us a new mission, because climate change means that we alone cannot do the work. We need to coordinate all different sectors, different government agencies and NGOs. So we are a coordinator. We are here facing circular economy. We're trying to make changes in circular economy. For instance, today is June 30th. I feel that we have improved a lot. We are able to receive the carbon fee, and also we have a circular act that is already in place. Now, we also want the society to transform with us, and that's the most difficult thing, because the government has limited power. We need the society to change with us in order to move forward. And I also have to say that through in this past period, things have not been very smooth. We are actually facing strong headwinds. For instance, soon after President Lai was elected, President Trump from the U.S. actually withdrew from the Paris Agreement, and we have two major wars. And this made us feel a lot of uncertainties. And because of these uncertainties, climate change sometimes would actually be neglected. So I believe every time something happens, I wrote a report to the Premier and the President and telling us our observations and opinions. But that's actually our position as a Ministry of Environment. We're sharing with them the current situation, our recommendations, what we should do. And I would really like to thank them for their belief. Thank you for believing in me, and thank you for really doing it immediately and not postponing it, because otherwise it is very easy for us to postpone our current system and wait for a while. I have to say that top-down support plays a very important role throughout this process. And I also feel that 2 years ago, I was from the civil society, and when I joined the government, I felt that the government was doing too slowly and need to move fast. And that's why we are accelerating, and currently we're still accelerating. And that's what we've been doing in the past 2 years. We feel that even though maybe the exterior environment is slowing down a little bit, we still continue to accelerate. That poses opportunities for us in Taiwan.
And also, speaking of the goal of net zero, I think that's a great challenge, because in the past we had 24 minus 1 and 2, and now we have 28 plus and minus 2, plus and minus 1. Then we changed because we thought the new president from the U.S. may bring new changes. However, even though it's just plus or minus 1, but that's actually a big volume. In the past few years, we cut off about 1, 2, and I think that's a great challenge looking ahead, and we can only rely on renewable energy, and a lot of them we have to produce a lot more renewable energy, otherwise we cannot overcome these challenges. And when we set our goal, we lay out the goal based on the Japanese experience. We spent a lot of time studying what happened in Japan and Korea, and actually Singapore, we benchmarked with these neighboring countries, and the carbon emission in Singapore has been rising. And for example, taking 2025 benchmark, actually in Taiwan, carbon emission was okay. And if you look at the peak volume, and among these 4 countries, I think we are not number 1, but we'll be number 2 if you look at this NDC target comparison. Certainly, we are not yet capable of making comparison with European countries because we have different industrial landscape. But we compare ourselves to Japan. I mean, we can be number 2. We don't have to target being a champion, but we're number 2. That's a great space for us. And speaking of carbon fee, carbon pricing, that's one approach to promote self-determined carbon reduction plan. So at that time we had 150, 300, 150, different level of pricing. This is quite different from other countries. Not every country has different level of pricing. So that's one method. Also, ETS, that's another approach that we leverage. In the past few years, we've been collaborating with Germany, And in 2008, when UK promoted ETS, that's when I first started this mechanism. And I always believe market mechanism is more effective than government mechanism. So I think in carbon pricing, we must incorporate the corporate rules so that the results can be better. So whether it's self-determined carbon reduction plan or international collaboration, we work hand in hand in parallel. And looking at the numbers, some of the companies, actually their submission were rejected because their plan were not good enough. And by 2030, 45.2 million tons of carbon emission. That's our final goal, and that's 113.96 million tons of carbon dioxide emission. So if you multiply the pricing, then that means 300 to even to 400 billion NT dollars. And for companies, that's about 10,000 or even 20,000 NT dollars per ton. So that's actually a big number. So if you look at the more than 2,700 self-determined carbon reduction plan, and among them, actually behind them, the number is great, and that is forming a new industry of carbon reduction plan. And certainly I need your effort from NGO. It would be great if we can monitor which company is doing well or not. And by the end of the year, in EU, they will have an ETS platform, and we can do test run by the end of the year. And next year, 2027, we can have further testing period. And by 2028, we hope we can officially run this EEX platform, and that's our target platform. So maybe you're curious who are the stakeholders. In Germany, we had a consultant, and he said everyone will be stakeholders, and many people will be involved. But now we just established a Green Growth Alliance, about 20 companies, and their emission are above 200,000 tons, and about 160 plants. So they are committed to these efforts. So we're targeting these companies because they have the potential to reduce carbon emission, and also they do not regard carbon emission as part of their cost like some other traditional industries. So I think bringing some good companies being as examples will be our first step. And for carbon pricing, for these companies, they take as much about 80% of the carbon emission companies. And I think this is feasible. And also we can sort of prevent the confusion created by ETS like in Korea. Even though in Korea they have been promoting this ETS system for more than a decade, but they are the carbon emission is increasing. And also I'm looking into GX ETS that's in Japan. So we are observing how our neighbors are doing, and we are taking careful steps. And for ETS, in my mind, I think we have returned the mechanism to the market mechanism. That is our goal. It is not priced by the government, because that will create a lot of pressure. So last but not the least, because we have this system, so carbon pricing as an engine for green growth. For example, now we see green investment value creation with all these further steps for the development. These are great signals to the civil society. And for international collaboration is also an important part. I think every country is looking forward to at least 5% of international collaboration. It's not like we are buying other people's buying anything from other country, but we would have some leverage. For example, we can develop new technology, for example, biochar, etc. In this aspect, based on Paris Agreement 6.2, Article 6.2, now we are entering the last phase, and Paraguay just won over Germany, in FIFA. So we are very happy to celebrate this. Anyway, I'm not against buying these carbon emission licenses, but we have to return to the market mechanism, like I said. And I'm grateful to NGOs, because you are like a pecking birds. You are picking out those greenwashing companies. And as you know, greenwashing is not really a popular topic in Taiwan. And I always said, those who are greenwashing, I mean, when it's low enough and you can wait, they become green. But greenwashing is just superficial work. So in financial institutions, now we have new ideas about how to make the regulation work for new companies, new IPO companies. And now we are observing the omnibus methods in EU. And if possible, for example, if we can incorporate these new methods to reduce the administrative costs for companies, we wouldn't give it up. So in Taiwan, I mean, for some companies, the scope 3 may be still challenging, but we can stay practical. So how to reduce the burden for companies, for the corporate stakeholders? We maintain the same goal, but we want to make it more practical. And we are not a composition contest. It's not just picking up garbage by the sea. We have to return to the real work, the real hard work. And that's one of the reasons I want to say something about circular economy. I know people are serious about net zero, but circular economy, actually, it's more practical. So in June, as circular economy become an official law, and within a week or two, the waste processing law will also be signified by the president. These two are supporting force for net zero. And as you can see, there's biochar and other, for example, the carbon license from the waste. That part used to be neglected very often. And now with this circular economy law, I think it can bring more commitment from the corporate stakeholders. That's one of the reasons to say, even though it's hard work, it's difficult to accomplish, but it's something we must do. And I'm grateful to everyone. Thank you for proposing all these solutions and comments. And before I became a minister, I was an entrepreneur. I know it's very difficult to do things we must do. And even though it's difficult, we shouldn't focus on the risk or the difficulty. Otherwise, we couldn't sustain. But seeing this difficult and risk, we have to maintain our belief, our conviction. So we are not just advocating for this. So we have to stay practical. Find solution, take action. These are the things we have to take. So I pledge to your advocacy, but also solutions. So in the future, I invite you to join the platform created by the government. And government itself in Ministry of Environment is also a platform. Your participation will be a great effort to make the carbon pricing platform better. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your remarks, Mr. Peng Qiming. Now, we are taking a group photo. I would like to invite audience from the left rows, right rows, moving to the center. We will have photographer on the stage. Speakers, panelists, please stay on your seat. Thank you. Thank you for your opening remark, Mr. Peng. So echoing what he said, for him, certainly the pressure is great, and promoting carbon pricing, also the mechanism, the policy, is not an easy work. So I want to say that we, as a whole, in the society, we need to share these efforts. I mean, net zero is for everyone. Even though we are facing some threats to national security, but net zero is something that we cannot stop. And we are seeing the weather is getting hotter to more extreme ends. Otherwise, it will be a disaster. So now, let us proceed to the forum. And we will have experiences sharing from Taiwan, Japan, and Korea. Now, it's my honor to have researcher Lin Yuxuan at Taiwan Climate Action Network, and her topic is carbon fees first, lesson from Japan and South Korea for Taiwan's next carbon pricing phase. She represents a perspective from a NGO, and certainly, like Minister Peng said, there were difficulties and experiences, and however, from NGOs, from a civil group, we will have more critical point of view. Thank you. Let's welcome her.
Minister Peng, Director Kwang, Professor Zhang, Professor Zhong, good morning. I'm Liu Yuxuan from TCAN. I'm very happy to be able to share with us this next step, carbon fee fest lessons from Japan and South Korea for Taiwan's next carbon pricing phase. We know that just last month, Taiwan finally reached a very important milestone. That is, we start to have our first carbon fees, and we are actually receiving 4.97 billion NT dollars. And you can see that semiconductor manufacturing issues accounted the most, but it is actually the petrochemicals and also the cement who have been emitting the most have not been actually charged that much. But it's actually because there's an important role for the self-determined reduction plan. Now we also know that for self-determined reduction plan, even though 430 factories applied, but 28 withdrew their applications and changed to standard rate instead. So from the carbon fee that we receive, we knew that the system actually plays a very important role. Now, according to the press conference information provided by the Ministry of Environment, by 2030, if all this is realized, they are able to reduce 45 million tons of CO2. So if Taiwan wants to achieve high mark of NDC, which is 30% reductions, they are able to contribute 80%, which is quite significant. Now, in order to do so, we see that there's quite good results. For instance, 90% of the factories are willing to actually apply for self-determined reduction plan. Our next question is how do we allow these 40-something million tons of CO2 to actually be reduced? Now, there are two things that we can do, we feel. Currently is to make public the self-determined reduction plan. We've actually looked at the overall openness of these plans. Out of these 20 businesses, we feel that the comprehensiveness of the plan has not been very well. For instance, you can see that around half of them have not explained very well about how they're going to reduce. Take renewable energy, for example. Many of the reductions would say that they will use renewable energies or green energies. This means they were not able to know how much they will be using, what are the sources, what are the different categories. We feel that more can be provided in their plan. Also, we feel that if they are to make public, we should be able to see the roadmap. Therefore, we feel that we need to see their, for instance, target every year. We want to know their current implementation process, and we also may be able to share the information in a different manner so that we're able to discuss the overall situation, and that way it will be very helpful for the next phase of Taiwan's carbon pricing. We also see that even though many of them are unclear, a few of the companies actually provide quite clear plan in their self-determined reduction plan. And we feel that those are the models that companies can refer to. Those can serve as templates so that the quality of disclosure can be improved. In addition, why do we want the plan to be made public? Because there are quite a significant impact that can be resulted. For instance, the general public can actually see what the companies have been doing in implementing the reduction plan, making sure that they can monitor the companies to deliver their own promises. And for competent authorities, of course, they are able to understand the overall reduction capacity of the industry and the total amount. And we also know that all these reductions year by year can actually be calculated, so you can actually manage and control the total amount. For financial institutions, we know that financial supervisory commissions have been encouraging financial institutions to provide preferential loans for those companies, so better performing companies. So if we're able to make public the information, financial institution can actually get better information about those results, and the investors can also know what are the companies have been performing for the companies that they've invested. We've also evaluated for preferential rate B and what's the results of carbon reduction. Preferential rates B actually benchmark the 25% better performing 25%. So 80% of them actually reduce less than 10%, and around 40% reduce less than 10,000 tons of CO2s. We found that out of these companies, many of them actually reduce less than 5%. So if we're able to increase the preferential rates, then we can actually encourage more reduction. So the first observation is that we feel that the plan can actually be more transparent. The second thing is that the rates needs to be increased step by step. So on the review committee, we already suggested that every 2 years they need to increase the rates. Now back then, the decision was made in 2024. So in 2026, it's already been 2 years. The next stage of the rates needs to already be discussed. So the companies can know in advance that indeed the carbon pricing would actually increase step by step according to plan instead of not increasing. In addition to Taiwan, we also see that Japan, South Korea, and Singapore in their carbon fee roadmap, they've also been quite clear. Take Singapore, for example. This year, they've increased their carbon price to 45 Singapore dollars, and by 2030, it is expected to increase to 50 to even 80 Singapore dollars. Now, even though Japan actually adopts the ETS system, but they have like a ceiling rate and also a floor rate, and they actually use a percentage to actually push, even though that percentage has been criticized by the civil society. Now, South Korea, even though does not have a management on the price of the carbon, but they also actually have a auction percentage. For instance, the power section actually will increase in the auction percentage to 50% by 2030. Now, this all shows that in the future, carbon pricing will only increase. We will also be able to see that in the past when we discuss carbon fees, we also look at the marginal reduction cost. Now, if you look at the report from IEEFA, you will know that currently carbon fee is around $10 in Taiwan. But if we want to actually encourage more developments in the renewable LNG and asking the industry to actually reduce carbon, current rate is not enough. It needs to go as high as $100 to $200 in order to facilitate a deeper and more significant carbon reduction. We also know that this year CBAM is officially launched. Now, starting from next year, July, they will need to pay CBAM fees to the EU. Now, we actually look at the simulator conducted by Sandbag, you will see that if none of the carbon fees have been provided in Taiwan, the CBAM net cost will be around $7.9 billion, which is much higher than Japan and lower than South Korea. So, however, if our fee can actually go as high as 740 NT dollars, we're able to save around a lot of dollars, and if we're able to actually increase that fee to $1,480, we are able to actually turn the cost into negative, and we're able to retain more money for operations in Taiwan. Now, if you see more and more ETS in the different system, we see that all these different countries also want to have their own adjustment system. Now, if you look at the World Bank report, you are able to see that the price continued to increase at around 7% on average. That number actually went from $10 in 2016 to $21 in 2026. However, the carbon fee in Taiwan currency stays at $10, so it's quite low. Now, take Singapore, for example. Their carbon tax continued to increase the tax rates to 80%. Now, I would like to provide some recommendations for what we need to do for the next phase. There are 3 things that we can do. First, of course, to increase the transparency of self-determined reduction plan. Secondly, follow the plan and gradually increase the carbon fee rate. And by doing these 2 things, we're able to actually address the carbon adjustment system globally. Now, in addition to talking about carbon fee, I also want to talk about ETS. Just as Minister Peng said, that in the next stage we will go into ETS, and that's already been in discussion before the launch of the carbon fee. And we hope that through the market mechanism, we're able to return the carbon price to a market mechanism. However, we do have some concerns because, for instance, there are some challenges of ETS. First of all, there's not enough carbon price signals. A lot of the ETS have been actually using free quota or covering limited scope to actually reduce the carbon price, so that the signals was meant to spend like 10 or 12 years to actually achieve to its actual standards. And many of the ETS also allowed carbon credit to reduce the delivery rate of the companies. And what we worry more is actually on the second one, that is on the system design and high administrative costs. Because in order for ETS to actually work well and operate well, it relies on market mechanism and also on more enough participants scale and also more liquidity. So if you look at our top 20 companies actually accounts for 80% of our oil emissions, you will see that 80%, as high as 80% of the emissions actually rely on those 20 companies. But if it's a small market, this means that participants need to actually bear a higher trading cost. Low liquidity also liquids and low turnover also liquid efficiency. Then this means that only a small portion of the company, they are already enough to actually control the market power and maybe distorted the effective utilizations of the credit. So it also needs a very clear design, and all this needs a lot of discussion. Even though on one hand it is more resilient, but on the other hand it also gives more room for companies to lobby and change the system. Now, as we said, ETS initially have a higher quota that are free, so this means that the revenue received by the government will be fewer, therefore they're not able to return it to the societal needs. We also see that in the past there's quite fluctuations and volatility in terms of price. It needs a longer learning curve in order for the price to actually achieve a high level, and also it's quite volatile. The EU actually spent over 10 years to actually make the ETS system more comprehensive. This year there's even some hit once again. Now, normally ETS is carbon taxes are more stable than ETS, which is very important for long-term investments of companies. Now, in addition to the design of the system, which may affect the volatility of the price, external events also impact the volatility of the market. For instance, take South Korea for example. If you look at the graph, this is actually the trading price and also the volume in South Korea. Every time there's, for instance, a new release of the quota and also COVID, that also affects the trading volume and the price quite significantly. EU this July expect to actually make changes in the ETS system. So in the past 6 months, there have been many criticisms from the industries in order to reduce the impacts of ETS. So as many as 90% of the projects has been postponed because of that and terminated because of that. And so the stability of the policy is also very important. Otherwise, that would definitely affect the decision of companies in investing in low carbon. And of course, it's very important today that we're able to see comparisons experiences in Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. Now you can see from Taiwan, it covers around 50-something%, 54% to be more exact. Now, for Japan, it's around 60%, whereas in South Korea, it's more, 73%. For every stage, they try to increase the coverage. Now, in terms of the entities that is being included, that's also something that we worry, because only 200 of them have been included. In Japan, it's as many as 300 to 400, and it's even more for South Korea, it's as many as 800. Now, even though there's no total emission cap in Taiwan, but since there's a self-determined reduction plan, we know that by 2030, we're able to achieve a certain amount in carbon reduction. What's special about Japan is that it's actually from bottom up, but we will ask the doctor to explain more from the Japan system. Now, for South Korea, it actually, of course, has an absolute emission cap. Now, in terms of auction, the design for Japan is that they only want to launch the auction system by 2033. Now that's also been criticized by the civil society that it's been dragging too long. South Korea will actually have a clear improvement in phase 4. That is, the power sector will gradually increase the auction percentage, and by 2030 will achieve around 50%. But for non-power sectors, it's maintained at 15%. Now for carbon price, even though we actually call it carbon fee, but our carbon price by 2030 can actually achieve around 1,200 to 1,800 NT dollars. Now, if for Japan, and the number is now at around 1,700 yen, and they expect that by 2030 it will be around 4,000 or 5,000 yen. Now, we're not able to, we are not sure whether that can actually reflect the increment. Now, for South Korea, their price is only at around 200 NT dollars. In terms of carbon offset credit, you can see that offset credit in Taiwan has actually been higher in Taiwan, but we hope that in the future we can reduce that percentage year by year. In terms of the income, because we now have the first carbon fee, and you can see that that number is actually higher than the ETS from South Korea. Now, the advantage of carbon tax, we've always been advocating the carbon tax. We feel that carbon tax is more suitable for Taiwan's context because, for instance, carbon tax is more stable in carbon price. It is more certain for the companies to make forecasts and to actually evaluate its carbon reduction costs. And it is also better for them to actually work with other policies from the government side to maximize and amplify the reduction effect. And since the ETS quota cap is already there, other policies may not able to amplify the reduction effect. Also, it has a lower administrative management cost. Think about it. Companies have, after 5 years of carbon fees, after 5 years, I think the companies will be very familiar with using and paying for carbon. And I think it's easier for us to transition into a carbon tax system. That way, we also don't need to build up an exchange system or infrastructure, and it's easier for management. Another functions of a carbon tax is that we can use it to reinvest in, for instance, a deeper carbon reduction technology, or to help the less advantaged to reduce the impact on the vulnerable groups and increase the acceptance of the policy. Also, we feel that carbon tax compared to ETS can more effectively cover more emission sources.
Here, in our conclusion, we have three advocates. First of all, carbon fee rates should rise steadily while ensuring high transparency in self-determined reduction plans so that other stakeholders can monitor its growth, its change. And for ETS market, our second advocate, ETS market mechanisms may not adequately reflect firms' true decarbonization costs. If there's a long volatility, then it will affect the willingness of companies to invest more in decarbonization efforts. So using this carbon pricing, actually it's easier for the companies, and compared with ETS, carbon taxation has significant advantages in administrative management, price certainty, fiscal or revenue utilization. Thank you very much for your attention. So thank you, Tiken. Thank you, Yuxuan, researcher at Taiwan's Climate Action Network, for your presentation. Our next speaker is from Korea. Director Kwang Rak Kwong, Director of Plan 1.5 South Korea, and his topic is how to fix broken ETS, key lessons from Korean ETS. Mr. Kwon has been working in NGO for a long while, and he's been an active advocate in climate change topics. And in his resume, he has worked in KPMG, a consulting firm, for a long time. Also, he worked in the Korean government. Therefore, he is very experienced in using a language, in understanding the language of NGO, the government, and also corporate side. So today, let us welcome him to share with us the Korean experience.
你好。Yeah, what's
Hi, everyone.
so yeah, so I will speak. I will start with English. So yeah, so it is really nice to meet you, and this is a great honor to be here. I know that the Taiwanese government already introduced the carbon-free system and is preparing for the ETS as well. So I'm really happy to share the Korean experiences and implication over 10 last years. First of all, I'd like to introduce my organization. So we were established in 2022, and we have three main pillars like this. So first one is strengthening the NDC, and the second thing is strengthening ETS, and the third one is that strengthening free average scheme for transportation sector, which can contribute for promoting the new electric vehicle in the world. Yeah, so first of all, since today's topic is carbon pricing, so especially for the ETS, so I would like to explain the background of each introduction in Korea. In 2008, President Lee established the low carbon green growth as a national agenda. So although it was quite controversial in civil society, because but I personally believe that it was a quite progressive one, because it resulted in introducing the ETS. Before deciding to introduce ETS, there was a huge debate among many civil society activists regarding whether to implement a carbon tax or emission trading scheme. There were concerns that the carbon tax could place a great burden to the industrial sector. Furthermore, considering the fact that the EU and the US were already implementing the ETS in their region, so the Korean government chose ETS rather than the carbon tax. However, introducing the ETS was not an easy task either. Civil society argued that the Korean government should move forward towards carbon tax, because ETS cannot guarantee the real, actual emission reductions. But why the industrial sector opposed both instruments, carbon tax and also ETS. So yeah, but finally, Korean government chose ETS as an implementing tool. So please let me explain the three key elements of Korean ETS. First element of the Korean ETS is its extensive coverage. It covers about 73 of the total national emission. This is quite big compared to the other countries like EU or China or US. All companies with average annual emissions of 125,000 tons or more are subject to regulation, including almost all large corporations and power plants. Also, large buildings such as university, the inner city express bus companies, and the waste treatment facilities operated by the local governments are also included in this ETS. For allocation method, it's quite complex, but I like to simplify. The government set a total emission, the allocation amount, which is called a cap, and based on the sector and the annual reduction path according to the NDC. And you can think of this as a method calculated by the multiplying the NDC emission pathway by the ETS coverage. And also, similar to the EU and the US, the Korean ETS operates its flexible mechanism. So Yeah, so Korean ETS began in 2015, and the first and the second phase was set for 3 years, and the third phase was set for 5 years. And you can think that the first phase is kind of a pilot phase for learning the ETS. So Korean government implemented 100% free allocation to all sectors. Starting from the second phase, the auction ratio was set at 3%. For the third phase, it was gradually increased to the 10%. Basically, all companies should be applied to the non-free allocation, except those in carbon leakage sectors. Large companies with a high emission mostly falls into these categories, which means carbon leakage sectors, and continues to receive a 100% free allocation in the future. So you can think that the non-free allocation is currently applied to mostly the power sector in Korea. Yeah, so this graph shows the carbon price on the Korean ETS, and I personally believe that the carbon price is the level of the carbon price is most important tool to reduce real emission. And this is really important to assess whether the ETS system is operating properly in the region. As you can see in the graph, the price started the $15 per ton at the beginning of the third phase, but gradually decreased, dropping to $6 by 2024. This demonstrates that allocation, the allowances supplied by the government were too excessive compared to the company's demand. Well, as I just said, the primary reason why carbon price is so low was that the Korean government allocated too many allowances relative to the corporate demand. Of course, the economic downturn caused by COVID-19 was played a role also. As a result, according to the estimate by the Korean government, a total of 140 million tons of surplus allowances were found in the market in 2024, amounting approximately 20% of the nation's total emission. It's quite large volume. Korean government had a chance. Korean government could have taken various measures to reduce these surplus allowances in the market, but they did not. As you guessed, the reason was that the Korean government concerned some kind of a backlash from the Korean industrial sector. The Korean ETS law already contains a provision allowing for changes to the allocation plans in the event of a changes such as economic downturn. However, Korean government did not take any kind of measures. As a result, the level of the carbon price fails to recover. As this situation went on, the large emitters began selling these surplus emission allowances on the market and generating massive excess profits. According to our analysis, the top 10 large companies sold 22 million tons of surplus allowances during the first and the second phase. Yeah, so most of these surplus were purchased by the state-owned power generation companies, and this can lead to the increasing the electric rate. To make matters worse, there was also the additional government mismanagement. This is a bad example from the Korean ETS. In 2022, the typhoon, which is called Hinnam-no, attacked the factory of POSCO, which is the largest emitter in South Korea. So the factory stopped around 4 months, but the Korean government failed to retrieve these surplus allowances in the POSCO because there is no regulation for retrieving these surplus allowance. Furthermore, it was revealed that last year there were errors in the regional level emission statistics. So about 25 million tons of additional allowances were allocated for the power sector in the third phase. So this is a prime bad examples of Korean ETS. And the allowing international credit, could be controversial, I think. So in Korean ETS, the allowing international credit import has also contributed to maintaining low carbon price. Currently, around 80% of the total international credit imported into Korean ETS comes from the cook stove product. And however, research shows that the actual reduction effect of this credit has been inflated tenfold. Given that the price of cook stove credit is around $2 per ton, so increased imports of this kind of international credit have lowered the demand from the industrial sector. So this is we are in the beginning stage of our fourth phase, and last year, Korean government decided to correct this kind of a problem in our system. So many efforts were undertaken for fourth phase, which runs from this year to until the 2030. First, the allocation cap was drastically reduced in the fourth phase compared to the third. The second, it was decided to introduce MSR, which means market stability reserve, to absorb the massive surplus allowances in the market. The third one is that the non-free allocation was expanded. Previously at 10%, it was decided to gradually increase this to 50% by 2030, especially for the power sector. Most important change is substantial reduction in the allowance cap. I think the level of the allowance cap is most important factor in operating the ETS. As I mentioned before, the cap of Korean ETS is typically linked to the reduction pathway of the NDC. And the bar graph, as you can see, represent the reduction pathway of the NDC. If linked to this pathway, then the allocation should have appeared as an upward convex shape. But however, this time, to promote the active reduction by companies, Korean government has adapted a linear pathway from 2026 to 2030. This is the most important change in the fourth phase, which begins this year. This is the details of our allocation plan for fourth phase, and you can see the details later. In addition to this change, various measures have been added to prevent the POSCO case. The law was revised, and the Korean government decided to retrieve the additional 25 million tons of over-allocated allowances to the power sector. As the Korean government set a linear reduction pathway in fourth phase, it decided to introduce MSR, similar to the EU ETS case, the Korean government decided to absorb current massive surplus allowances through the MSR, amounting to about 85 million tons. Although specific plan has not been announced, the Korean government intends to use this absorbed volume to control the market price. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the raising the auction ratio for power sector from 10% to 50% is also the important change. And this increased the cost of purchasing allowances for the power sector, which contributes to increase the electricity rate in the industrial sector, can encourage companies to expand their investment in the renewable energy and the energy efficiency. Yeah, this is a detailed the regulation for determining the carbon leakage criteria. It is quite similar to the EU ETS case. Before the start of our fourth phase, the Korean industrial sector gave a huge pressure to the government to increase the limit on the usage of international credit. But this was because, as I mentioned, the price of low quality is very attractive to the company. So Korean civil society argues these problems. So as a result, it was decided to maintain current the level of the limit of usage of international credit. Although the Korean government did not fully accept the demand by the civil society, but I think this effect is being realized from this year. So carbon price, which was about $7 last year, now became doubled, and experts expect that if this trend goes on, then the price will reach around $60 or $70 by 2030. However, Korean civil society plans to monitor closely the government's plan and policies because the Korean government has traditionally attempted to control over carbon prices increases as much as possible to minimize the burden to the industrial sector. Recently, the Deputy Ministry of Environmental responsible for operating the ETS mentioned during the public hearing session in National Assembly that this year's carbon price will be controlled at a maximum level of $12 per ton. So this is the last page. Another remaining point for civil society is to how to utilize the revenue generated from the expansion of auctions. The Korean government has not been able to effectively utilize this fund through all of the auctions. You can see the left side. So the total budget side of the Climate Action Fund is just nearly 1% compared to the total budget of Korean government. And this fund is being invested to the project which have no additionality regarding regarding climate change. So this is the main problem that we are trying to fix this problem in fourth phase. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the presentations. Next, we will listen to the experience from Japan. Now, Japan across the Asia is the first one implementing carbon pricing, so a very early entry. So recently, Japan is also trying on transforming its carbon pricing mechanism. So today we are very honored to have Dr. Kimiko Hirata from Executive Director of Climate Integrate from Japan. She has been devoted in advocating for climate policy in Japan for a long time. In the past, serving as an NGO worker, she has been involved in, of course, the phasing out of fossil fuel power generation, and her team have also been successful in stopping the constructions of new coal plants, power plants. Now, internationally, she has also been awarded in many awards related to climate and also environment. So she's quite instrumental in advocating climate policy and pricing mechanisms in Japan. Next, without further ado, I will give the floor to Dr. Kimiko Hirata on the topic climate policy and the pricing mechanisms in Japan. All right, the floor is yours.
What I'm going to share is based on our recent report, GX report. So please look at our report if you want to know more about our system. But let me first introduce myself and my organization. I'm Kimiko Hirata from Climate Integrate, which is an independent climate policy think tank. I founded 4 years ago. We aim to protect our climate by research, engagement, and support. And also we aim to integrate science, policy, and society. Our method is as a think tank to show the facts, but also as an advisor to convey the facts. And then we really want to promote consensus building to achieve net zero. So I added one slide, probably useful for you to know the status of the Japanese situation on emission reduction. Our greenhouse gas emission has been decreasing since 2013. However, the projection, based on the projection, if we continue the current policy scenario, then we will not be able to meet our government NDC, which is 46 to 50% by 2030, 6% by 2035, and 73% by 2040. And in government, the legal framework, we have Climate Change Act and Energy Policy Act. But in 2023, government introduced and enacted GX Promotion Act. GX is a green transformation that is basically to aim net zero, but at the same time to accelerate green growth by Japanese industry. So net zero is part of it, but main objective I would say is to support the Japanese industry to grow. Under the GX Promotion Law Act, the government set the GX promotion strategy for growth. And underneath, in order to support the government, support the industry to invest into net zero technology, such as ammonia or hydrogen, government decided to issue economy transition bonds that are a sovereign bond for 10 years to provide upfront investment. At the same time, government decided to introduce GX ETS. So this is a combination of carrot and stick. And in order to operate, the government also established GX Acceleration Agency. And when we look at the current, last year's, the carbon pricing status, well, we have very low rate carbon tax introduced in 2012, quite a long time ago. It's about $2 right here. And then also in Tokyo Prefecture government and Saipan Prefecture government has their own ETS, but pricing is quite low. And then when you see Taiwan is around here and Korea is around here, a little bit higher than Japan, but still quite low compared to many other countries. So that's where we are at now. And finally, Japan introduced ETS. You know the system, so I will skip this slide. And let me briefly introduce about GX ETS. After 3 years, from 2023 to 2025 of voluntary phase, finally, from this fiscal year, from April, government started phase 2 of GX ETS. So ETS design is very, very complicated. But this is the first of its kind mandatory participation of large emitting company covering 300 and 400 big high emitting companies. And for all sectors, it's free allocation. And there are no overall cap. So these 300 and 400 companies cover 60% of Japan's GHG emissions, but we do not know the overall emission cap, meaning that how this emission trading system contribute to the NDC and then national level emission reduction target. We don't know anything about it. So this is supposed to be designed to achieve net zero or NDC, but actually it's not directly linked to it. That's a unique, to me, a little bit strange scheme of this design itself. And free allocation to all sectors, using the grandfathering to some sectors, but most heavy industry and power sector are under benchmarking. But various adjustment and consolidation for each industry are applied. And there are many rooms for industry to lobby and reflect their interest into those systems. I will come back to that after later on this. But in principle, on benchmarking, top efficiency benchmarking the idea. I will also come back to that too. And as already referred, the government introduced the ceiling price and floor price in order to, stabilize the price, avoiding the volatility, whether it's high price or low price. But as you know, it is quite low. So this is another character of Japanese GX ETS, and allowing using the external credit up to 10%, including the domestic offset mechanism and also external, international credit, using Japan crediting mechanism that Japan already introduced. So this is a quite simplified snapshot. But I would like to mention one more. These 300, 400 companies, many of them received the investment subsidies through this GX transition bond. So they already gained some, benefits out of it, financial benefits out of it, and then free allocation for the stick side of it. And allocation method for allowance is basically benchmarking and some grandfathering. I will not go too much in detail, but for the grandfathering, annual annual reduction rate is only 1.7% reduction, which is actually slower than actual emission reduction. So is that going to be a good incentive or not? It's something that can be raised as a question. And then there are several considerations that can weaken the incentives. For example, for the companies under the grandfathering, early reduction efforts are being taken into consideration, and some high-emitting, high trade share companies like steel companies, carbon leakage risk are being taken into consideration. And companies who invest a lot on R&D for GX, for example, for the investment for new technology on hydrogen, or new technology for next-gen nuclear, for example, these efforts can be taken into consideration as well. And if companies shut down the office or some big changes happened in production, affecting production volume, that can also be taken into consideration. So I'd like to share some of the analysis of this scheme. This ETS has just started this year, and this year is going to be used for emission verification and then accounting. So actual allocation will be start actually from the next year. So it's not fully implemented yet, but we will project what is going to be happen. So first analysis is a benchmarking analysis. How it scheme, detailed determined benchmark standard could have incentive for the companies. So we look at the power sector, which is the biggest emitting sector in Japan. The government set that top 15% efficiency is a top runner compared to the average. So government assumed that it takes 10 years that all sectors reach top 15% efficiency. And 2030 is a mid-year, 5 years, meaning that 32.5% top efficiency level is a target. And for power sector, government introduced fuel-specific benchmark, meaning that coal power means coal power benchmark. LNG power plants use LNG power benchmark. But when you look at the actual efficiency level between top 32.5% level and average level, there is not much difference. Meaning that next 3 years, there will be almost no incentive for power companies to reduce emissions for their emissions from the coal power and LNG power. And then only after 2029, the government introduced the all thermal power benchmark, meaning that company which has more LNG has generous benchmark, and the company which has less LNG and has more coal power has stringent benchmark. So if we apply this benchmark, assuming that the power generation amount are the same and the fuel mix are the same, JERA, this is the biggest power company that has a lot of LNG power plant, actually increase emission by 2030. And then this is much weak target compared to their own target. And then on the side of the J-Power, which is the second biggest thermal power company, and then their power plants are all coal power, they will have to reduce emission by 2030 compared to 2024. However, their own company's commitment is much deeper. So is this ETS giving much stronger incentive for companies to reduce emissions? This is something that we found out. So the question to the government, is it going to be really with the strong incentive for the power sector? And second analysis we have done is that carbon pricing. So floor and ceiling price is $11 to $25, which is a bit higher than current Korean or Taiwan pricing level, but look at this, it's still not that high. And then as you see that this is an existing pricing, bar chart, but this 11 to 25 or a little bit higher, it's going to be Japan's 2030 price, which is quite low, we have to say. And then looking at, I will talk a little bit about the third phase of GX ETS. Many detail of the scheme is not yet decided, so we don't know yet. So we don't know the scope of the systems. We don't know if government will introduce the overall emission cap for all covered sectors, and how much it's going to be in terms of the level of the stringence. What we only know is that paid allocation will be introduced, but only for power sector. And then the remaining other sectors stay as free allocation even after probably 2030. The government doesn't really say that when the phase 3 is going to be starting. So this is also something that we are a little bit worrying when it's going to be reviewed. And the revenue from the paid allocation will be collected as a specified business operator contribution, and this is going to be used to redeem the transition bond that are spent from 2023 to 2033 for 10 years. In addition to additional surcharge for the fossil fuel extractor, called fossil fuel surcharge. This is very complicated, but as you see, SBOC and fossil fuel surcharge is going to be collected by 2050 in order to repay already spent 10 years upfront investment. This is a little bit strange scheme. People and companies up to 2050 have to pay the investment in the past. So the burden will be happening for long term, but spending is going to be made for this 10 years. So this is the scheme. And the last analysis is the carbon pricing, including the surcharge and the contribution using the paid allocation. Government introduced another unique system in the law. There are capping of the pricing of the surcharge and contribution. Only the level of the pricing will be up in the level of the revenue loss of existing carbon taxation and feed-in tariff on renewable energy, meaning that the government don't put the further burden for the people as of now. So if the the consumption of the fossil fuel reduced, then the taxation will be reduced. Surcharge and contribution can be added only for that losses. So in reflecting this system, the government cannot increase the levy or charges up to 2035. It's going to be very, very low. And then we have done the two different scenario cases, but only after 2040 or 2045, their level will be going up. Meaning that in order to repay the investment by the bond, will be paid back by the future generations. So this is some time frame gap between the spending and also the collecting money, and this reflected very low pricing on the carbon for the next 10 years. So that means that the business can continue doing the business without not worrying about rising the pricing on carbon. So there are a lot to concern about this system, and this is totally bottom up based on the current emissions, and it's not really linked to the NDC and benchmark itself is very weak, and credit is allowed up to 10%, which is so generous. And DX transition bond redemption continue by 2050. So is this something we really wanted as the carbon neutrality? We don't know. There are a lot, critical voices from civil society, of course, and but it's decided anyway, and it's legislated already. And some, the friendly experts told me that this is historical because high-emitting companies block and oppose this emissions trading system introduction for decades and after decades, and saying that this is a quite negative impact on the Japanese industry. But finally they said yes, and then they are under no longer a voluntary scheme, but under the government control. Allocation will be, stringent annually, and then the government has to calculate emission, the company has to calculate emission, has to submit the transition plan, including the target for mid-term and long-term, and then it is going to be open to the public, not probably free, but some of them can be under the investigation. So, and carbon tax might have been much easier, but we cannot go back. So how we as a Japanese stakeholder can monitor this and then make it more effective in order to achieve our common goal. So that is the status we are at now. So we are looking at how much we can know about the benchmark setting and allowance setting for each companies. And we already have a huge concern about transparency. So transparency must be very, very important to be have the credibility of the system, and also power sector decarbonization is very crucial, and electrification of the system is very important as fuel import very vulnerable countries. So is this system accelerate power sector decarbonization? That is something that very, very important. And lastly, the invest now but charge later is the good framework. We need to monitor about that scheme as well. But in the end, this is not only the big corporate and government scheme. This is something that price will be passed on to the consumers, and then this is our country's system to make sure that 60% of all greenhouse gases emissions of this country. So we are part of the system. We are part of the voice. We are part of the making this better. So I think that this is very important for Japanese community and the population as a whole to make efforts to make this system effective and useful for achieving net zero. So I stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kimiko Hirata, for the presentation. Even though Dr. Kimiko Hirata actually gave us a more neutral title, but I think through her presentation, you will definitely feel that it's quite passionate, it's quite critical, and it's very on the point. All right, next we will take a short coffee break. Before we go into the coffee break, just 3 reminders. First of all, we provide snacks during this forum. It is at the registration counter. But remember, no food and drinks are allowed in this venue. So if you want to enjoy the snacks, please do it outside the venue. Secondly, if you have any questions for our Japanese speakers, Korean speakers, or Taiwanese speakers, please use Slido. Use your mobile phone to scan the QR code. On Slido, you can ask your questions. We will prioritize the questions on Slido. Now, if there are no more questions on the Slido, we will then open the floor. So please leverage Slido as much as possible. Last but not least, these events is actually one of the series events across the Taiwan Climate Action Week. It goes from June 20th to July 5th. To 25th. There are many different activities throughout this week. Now, if you want to know what are the activities there, Google Climate Action Week. I think the first one that pops up will be the official website of Taiwan Climate Action Week. You will know more about the event and you will know what other events is coming up. Please join us in the next series of events. We'll take a 10-minute coffee break until 10:45. Please be back at 10:45. And you can now enjoy the snacks. Once again, thank you to all our speakers. We will then start with the panel discussion at 10:45. And we also like to thank Dr. Kimiko Hirata for waiting.
来宾以及
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, people join us online. We will begin in 1 minute.
各位来宾以及现
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we're now moving to the very important part of this forum on panel discussion. First, in addition to our 3 speakers who have already presented, who also serve as panelists, we also have very important panelists with us. For instance, Director General of Climate Change Administration of the Ministry of Environment, Cai Lingyi. Also with us is former Vice Minister of Shi Wenzhen of the Ministry of Environment Department, currently professor at the National Zhengzhi University. Also, we would like to invite a very important partner from CSOs, that is Professor Liu Zhongen from Department of Sociology at National Taiwan University. We will ask our 3 panelists each to have around 10 minutes for a small talk. And of course, you can shorten your time. And at around 1 minute, we will remind you that you only have 1 minute left. And since Director General Cai prepared a slide, we will first ask Director General Cai to give us a short presentation. Afterwards, we will then invite all panelists and speakers to be on the stage and sit on the panel with us. Next, a round of applause for DG of Climate Change Administration at Ministry of Environment, Cai Lingyi. All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, organizers. And thank you, distinguished guests, professors, people who care about carbon pricing. Actually, preparing these slides originally, I wanted to help you have a more concrete idea on the next step of carbon fees. I hope that we have some background information we've prepared for you so you can get quickly into our discussion. Be it carbon pricing on ETS or carbon fees, I think the most important goal, of course, is that it is us in moving towards net zero. It is a very important policy instrument. Now, this is the structure of our green gas emissions. Over 50% of them are from manufacturing industry. And of course, we put energy use into different sectors, and that's why you will see that, be it on the charging of carbon fees or in the future the implementations of ETS, manufacturing industry would be the sector that we start as a priority. Now, of course, under the current Climate Change Response Act, be it carbon pricing, carbon fee, or carbon trade, we do have legal basis for implementation, but exactly how to implement and execute, I think it still needs more details, and we need to continue to formulate sub-acts in order to regulate it more. So in 2024, regarding carbon fee, we do have regulations on carbon fees and also regulations on self-determined reduction plan. So in the future, on the implementation of ETS, it would not be implemented right away because we do need a lot of regulations in place in order for us to launch this system. Now, I want to help us give you a more concrete idea, and this is an important basis for us in discussing our carbon pricing mechanism, be it ETS or carbon fee. An important goal, of course, is on carbon reduction. The target of carbon reduction, I think these slides have stated all. These are the main emissions by sectors. Now, on the charging of carbon fees, we are now charging direct and indirect emissions. They are all included in the charging of carbon fees. I think that is also a key in our discussion in the next phase. So you will not be able to see power sector over here, but of course, the power sector currency, we're not charging on all the carbon emissions of the power. We are only charging on the actual power use of the power plants itself. Of course, this would affect the structure of our ETS. Japan, South Korea mechanisms, we all know that and learn from them that power sector has been included. So I think when we're building our ETS, this is something that we need to take into account. Out of all the sectors that we're charging and regulated right now, iron and steel, of course, are the majority. The majority of them comes from iron and steel, but number 4, of course, would be the top 4 would be the semiconductor industry. The indirect emission accounts for the majority of them. That's meaning that they're using a lot of power. Now, the carbon emission from that power would be the carbon cost that the semiconductor industry need to bear. So this is actually the carbon fee structure. Now, if we want to go into ETS, as Minister Peng mentioned in the opening remarks, we are designing and planning ETS. Initially, of course, it would definitely be those companies with over 25,000 tons of emissions. Now, of course, these over 200 companies would be thinking about whether or not they would be regulated on carbon fee or ETS. Now, in Taiwan, moving toward ETS, we need to have a very good engagement and consultations with those large emission companies. Now, the carbon fee mechanism in Taiwan is not a simple one. It is not just because, you're using the fuel and then you actually pay a certain fee. We use it through a formula. For instance, we look at the greenhouse gas emissions that they have, and then we also see if they have submitted their own self-determined reduction plan. If they submitted the reduction plan, then they would be qualified for a preferential rate. Of course, we also take into consideration the risk factor of carbon leakage. So carbon fee in Taiwan is not just a very simple rate. It's not just you charge by a certain rate. The carbon reduction mechanisms are also included in the design. So in the review committee, of course, initially we have this standard rate, which is around $10 per ton. But of course, the review committee also said that by 2030, we hope to the number will achieve at around $40 to $60 per ton. But I would like to take this opportunity and share with you that actually when we're talking about carbon pricing, this carbon fee mechanism indeed, since they have these incentive brought by the preferential rate, there is a quite significant reduction effect. This is a slide that I will always share with you in different occasions. They will then transition to a low carbon fuel. So you can see such as iron, steel, and cement. Those Scope 1 high emission companies, the use of fuel in their processes are the main carbon emissions. So since we are asking them to reduce their own plan, now even though they haven't proposed much proposals, but you think about it, if they need to transition their current, for instance, coal burning or other carbon fuel, they need to change it to low carbon, then of course that would definitely account for over 50% of the reduction. This is a very important, I would say, effect that you can observe so far. However, so far the goal has only ended at 2030. So I want to share with you, according to the roadmap of the carbon reduction, of course the review committee wants to achieve a higher carbon fee by 2030. But we also need to take into account those 400 companies with over 25,000 tons of carbon emissions. With such fee, can we incentivize them to reduce more? And that's exactly why the Ministry of Environment's thinking that if we want to refer to other countries, for instance, EU ETS have been implementing for a long time. What about Asia? Japan and South Korea are also implementing ETS systems and mechanisms. I think in the future we can't just see the 47 million tons of CO2s that we will be reducing by 2030. We want to know that if we want to reduce as many as 40% in our NDCs, those high emission companies will still be the main target. Power sectors and will still be the main target. Without ETS, relying on carbon fee alone, it would not be easy for us to achieve our goal by 2035. So that's a brief introduction of the background of Taiwan. I think that gives you an overall understanding. So if we want to talk about the next phase of carbon fee, I know that the organizers is an NGO, and I think that means that people can then have a more open-minded attitude in discussing this topic. What's your ideas about the mechanism? I know you may have a lot of recommendations. It's not easy to implement ETS, and what's needed, of course, it's more engagement with stakeholders. And what we need to engage more, in addition to NGOs and civil societies here in Taiwan, I think we need to also engage more with these over 400 companies that will be regulated or is under regulations, because they feel that carbon fee currency is quite cheap. And that's why they feel that, oh, maybe they can stay at that stage. We need to continue to engage with them and let them know that the fee will increase year by year. And we also would need to let them know that with the implementation of ETS, how exactly are we going to go about doing it? And there's not going to be a big room for free allocation anymore. So engagement and communication is very important. It's not easy, but we also are very grateful for experts from Japan and South Korea so that we have more discussions and inspirations. That's it for my brief introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Director General Tsai. Thank you for the sharing. I got a few key messages. I wonder if you do. Actually, Ministry of Environment also think that more than 400 companies now covered in the carbon pricing system. The key message is it's aligned that in the future, time fee should grow. However, what is the drive behind? Like she said, ETS is difficult to implement. So there are so many factors that can be manipulated by people. So how to do that? How to drive up the carbon fee currently, which is currently too low? So I think that's a key topic for the panel discussion. Now let's welcome our panelists. Just a moment, we're adjusting the seats.
对，文珍老师，然后是你。谢谢。
Just like Director General Tsai mentioned, she had 10 minutes of small talk, and now that's Professor Shi from National Cheng University, and she has 10 minutes. And we will have a reminder at the last 1 minute. Dear moderator, panelists, and distinguished guests, students, audience. Well, I'm a professor. The semester just ended, so I'm like calling my audience as students. So forgive me. So yes, I'll complete my small talk. Within 10 minutes. Otherwise, you can just neglect my title, professor. Okay. After listening to the experience sharing from Korea and Japan, I have 2 points to share with you. First, as we look at carbon pricing, most people say, okay, this is good. In a carbon emission reduction policy, most countries leverage carbon pricing policy because it's difficult to regulate directly, and it feels that carbon pricing is effective. However, as we approach this mechanism, and we are doing more and more research, we find out that the level of complexity is beyond imagination. In different countries, as they have different industrial landscape existing, also they have different policies existing, and also domestically, there's different power level among stakeholders domestically. So it will make the system more complicated. So as we were designing the mechanism, I heard a lot of criticisms. They're saying that there are premium and there are special taxation level, etc. And you have self-determined carbon emission reduction plan, and you have different level of surcharge, and the whole system also consider the high carbon leakage ratio. So it feels like it's a complex, complicated algorithm. So why we designed it into such a complicated equation? It's because we want to involve all the stakeholders, because they all have to dedicate some input to make this mechanism work. And with all their contribution, we need to adjust the design so that we can accommodate their effort. People thought carbon pricing is easy, but that was because they only thought about fossil fuel. However, at different jurisdictions for carbon taxation, there are some exceptions. And for ETS, it's certainly complicated from its original form, from traditional bottom top-down cap, and now we are also seeing baseline credit in Japanese GX, and also safeguard mechanism in Australia, which is sort of based on base credit. So ETS, its design in nature is complicated, and different country, different jurisdiction, they have different consideration. And for example, from Korea, since 2015, since they first implemented ETS, why people thought it's failing? Because carbon price has stayed low. But is this a main indicator showing that the system is not working? Well, it could be a main reason. However, there are other secondary factors. For example, the communication, the context of how government involve other stakeholders in the corporate side. And now the stringency and also allocation, these are things they have to prepare for next step. And like Minister said, so we also observe the design of the system in Japan. As you can see, the baseline credit, the benchmark, and also flexibility, the ambiguity, it's making the system also very complicated. And also they have fossil fuel surcharge that is connected to other policy tools. And in comparison, I mean, listening to our two speakers from Japan and Korea, actually, I think Taiwan's carbon pricing mechanism is not as complicated as we thought. So what I said just now, there was the background, the context. Now, I think I want to formulate a message for you to think. As we are looking into the carbon pricing mechanism in other jurisdictions, because they are not necessarily countries, if we look at the design by jurisdiction, we think that, okay, we can take a lesson from here, take another from there. And before you say so, maybe there's homework to do first. We look into the jurisdiction, the region, for example, we look into the content. What is the target they're exploring, and what is the real results after implementation? For each carbon pricing mechanism, you have to take consideration of the context of the jurisdiction. We look at the domestic conditions, and then we can tell and see why their carbon pricing mechanism looks like so. And then, after such, homework, after such study, then when we look into our own carbon pricing mechanism, then we can see what's the key point, because we have our own context as well. So certainly, we have to start with studying the mechanism. We look at, for example, the Asian countries, how they price the carbon emission. For example, in Singapore, they have significant rise in the growth of carbon prices. However, behind that, they do not have a transparent set or communication, because now in Taiwan, the government is communicating with these carbon emitting companies, saying that if they effectively reduce carbon emission, actually the government can return part of the tax. And in Singapore, actually the actual carbon tax compared to the nominal tax, I mean, there's a huge gap. They don't necessarily charge as much, or the government does not necessarily take as much as they claim. So behind all this carbon pricing design, sometimes it's showing the result people want to see. For example, in industries, the concrete and also steel factors industries, they are exceptions. They have exemptions. It's because they do not consider fossil fuel as the raw material. So in other countries, the steel industry, also concrete industry, they are not paying carbon tax, but it's because of different contexts. So during our communication, some of our stakeholders will say the carbon tax in Singapore is high. However, the pressure on those who's paying the tax is not as high as it might be seen. And in Taiwan, I think we have good advocacy and good communication skills, and we have partners in Japan and Korea that we can borrow the experiences. So in the future, if we are to draft a policy to the government, as we are looking into the mechanism, we have to consider as many factors as possible, and we have to stay practical, because as we are promoting a new mechanism, different stakeholders from different industries, how to persuade them that they are convinced that their sacrifice or their efforts can push forward and we will implement the mechanism. That belief is very important. And then I want to hear the response from Japan and Korea. Speaking of carbon pricing, most people discuss the power industry. In Taiwan, power industry is highly regulated. It's unlike EU. The power sectors in EU, 100%, they go to auction the market. And certainly EU, they have their own mechanism to subsidize these power factors, comparing their cost to, for example, manufacturing. And in Singapore, when the government collects carbon tax, they can subsidize the vulnerable or the disadvantaged domestic use to compensate their utility fee. However, for the power sector, if they're only responsible for the power plants in their region, in their own companies, since in the future ETS will cover the second phase. So in the future, the consumer of this power will have to pay the carbon tax. However, in EU, they target power industry as the primary carbon emission reducing factor. However, looking into the Korean experience, the power industry, as we look into Director Kwang's presentation, they will auction the allowance. However, from my understanding, the power industry in Korea is also highly regulated. And I believe in other regions, in other countries, how they use the mechanism of carbon pricing and how they treat power industry in the development. And like one of the speakers said, energy transition is a powerful tool. And it's just as we look into different jurisdictions, how they price their carbon emission, and they have different level of regulation, how do we adjust the carbon pricing? I mean, that's my question to our Korean and Japanese experts. Thank you, Professor Shi. Thank you for your talk. And now we have Professor Liu from Department of Sociology, National Taiwan University. Dear moderator, Director General, dear audience and experts, good morning. I learned a lot. I'm very happy to be here. And also this semester, I have this comparison a lecture, for East Asian countries. So you see, in East Asian region, we have a lot of similarities. And when it comes to carbon pricing, different countries have different steps and different pace in implementing the mechanism. And we are very inspired by the experience sharing. And as a panelist, I want to come back to a more theoretical scope. And in Taiwan, I want to share with you what is the progress. theoretically, I think in our discussion, the focus is really which is better, whether carbon pricing works better or ETS. So if you have taken courses in environmental economy, actually theoretically speaking, if the design is fine, then actually these two tools, I mean, they have very similar results. They are both very good. It's not there's no such perfect or more advanced, absolutely policy tool. And the key is really how do you take care of the details of the design? How do you localize the tool so that you can make the tool work for the jurisdiction? So there's no absolute better or not so good. So in economic theories, these policy tools, they have their own advantages, weakness certainly. So if you look at carbon tax, the advantage would be the pricing signal is very clear, it's obvious. For example, $300. And for the corporate side, if they're making a decision whether they invest more in new technology, then okay, this pricing signal is clear, so it will be a go, it will be a push for them to adopt a new technology. However, there always the other side of the moon, there will be weakness. For example, in reducing carbon emission, like Director General from Ministry of Environment said, if we have a cap, we have a goal of carbon emission reduction, I would say carbon pricing is not a very effective tool. In this system, the design of carbon pricing is that as long as you pay, you can continue emitting carbon. On the other hand, if you look at ETS system, well, I prefer, in Chinese, I prefer to say the carbon trading and mission. I mean, I like to use the full name. And the Minister of Environment, he said he is pro-market. And I think where there's a cap control, then there's a market. It's connected. And it's the government organizing the market. So you have to first set a cap, set a limit, a ceiling to carbon emission. And you see the quota, you have the allowance, and then gradually you allocate the allowance. For ETS, advantage is apparent. It can respond to, it corresponds to a more concrete carbon emission reduction. For example, you have this allowance of a certain amount, then usually we can achieve the goal if you run the ETS system. However, the weakness will be the pricing signal is really weak and it's fluctuating all the time. And there's uncertainty if you want to investigate the price advance. And in Taiwan, as we are looking into covering NDC into ETS design, what is the overall or proper cap, or what is the pricing? Whether it's 1,000 or 5,000, I mean, no one can really say which scope it is. I mean, no one have this concrete evidence. And as we see in Korea, actually, it's highly fluctuating. The market is not really stable. And also, if you look at macro economic performance, if the economy is not performing well, certainly carbon emission will come down.
So in terms of international design, they want to, of course, learn from the better ones. So there's always like the floor and ceiling price, so that there is we can minimize fluctuations and volatility of the price. And that way, we're also able to see the cap of reduction. So these are the advantages and disadvantages of each system. But why is it then we now see that ETS seems to be the mainstream? Because if you look at the report from the World Bank, it seems that more countries are adopting ETS and the management of total cap. Because experiences tell us seems that politically ETS seems to be a more feasible approach. Coming back to the EU experience, originally they also want to implement carbon tax, and a lot of obstacles were faced. And then ultimately the companies agreed that if I were to be regulated, I want to be able to choose what regulates me. So ETS is the one that's in place. Now ETS, of course, it's easier to get free quota, free allocation. This means that you don't don't have to pay in the early stage, I would be able to allocate to you, and it's harder to do so with carbon tax. But of course, in Taiwan, we have the self-determined reduction plan. This is like adopting a similar spirit. I want you to be able to achieve the targets. Fee is not the main purpose, because of free allowance, ETS is easier to be initiated, and that way the government also does not need to set the price, because the Ministry of Environment is having a headache on setting the price. If it's $300, civil society say it's too low, industry say it's too high, then we put the burden and the pressure to the market. So the government doesn't have the pressure on setting the price. But this process doesn't eliminate the politicalness, because the politicalness is actually lies on the cap that you set, and also the linear pathways or the slope that is designed. The Japan and Korea experience tells us that it is still a politically controversial topic, and devil is in the details. And the past is on discussing the price, but now it's on whether or not the reduction should be 1% or 2%. That will highly affect how the market operates. Now, based on past experience of carbon trade, governments not setting the price seems to remove some of the burden from the governments. But if they want to tighten the cap, of course, that can also be in line with UN systems and NDCs, and seems that it's clearer that way and more justified that way. But of course, with ETS, it's also easier to create. My observation is that it sort of creates more opportunities so that some people can actually become beneficiaries of these policy. For instance, if I'm able to reduce carbon, I can sell it to other companies, or maybe there are exchanges, and there are also consultants that are able to participate in this process, further consolidating this policy. Now, more importantly, globally, since ETS is now the mainstream, it's also because the policies are learning from each other. For instance, Taiwan is now learning from the EU, and South Korea during the design process also learned from many other countries. The World Bank, the UN has many systems expanding its policy, saying that, oh, I can teach you how to do this. So comparatively, carbon tax doesn't have such alliance or consortium. And because of these above-mentioned reasons, it seems that globally, ETS has now become the mainstream in terms of policy instruments. But once again, I want to say it doesn't mean that it is necessarily more advanced or better. We still need to find, based on our context, an approach most suitable to us. Of course, in summary, I want to come back to the current stage. What should we do next? I feel that the current dual-track system would be very difficult. How do you design, for instance, very quickly, maybe 80% of those regulated entities, if you want to choose ETS, you need to make sure that these two tracks are, I would say, fair. And to achieve so within a short period of time really depends on the detailed design of the Ministry of the Environment. It's going to be very difficult. You can't just say that as a pilot scheme, or a part of them can give it a try. If it's a good design, others can learn. It's, I think, for the short term would be the biggest challenge. For the long term, I think some of the challenges include what the researcher from TCAN said, which include the turnover rates and liquidity of the exchange and the trade, because there are fewer participants in the markets in Taiwan than of Japan and Korea. So those are the challenges that we know in advance, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not feasible. I think we still, I'm just putting the challenges out there and saying that it needs to be addressed. I'll stop here. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Professor Liu, for the introduction. Now I will ask questions according to the questions I received on Slido, and I will ask our speakers and panelists to answer the question. Thank you for proposing so many different questions. I will first ask questions that is addressed to our Japanese and Korean speakers. The first question is addressed to Dr. Kimiko Hirata, because Dr. Kimiko Hirata, you mentioned the design of ETS in Japan and the NDC are not coupled, they're not linked together. And you also mentioned that the civil society has a lot of concerns over ETS, including transparency and effectiveness. Now, since the GX Promotion Agency is in charge of promoting the market operations and company financing of ETS, but it seems that the implementation of EPS is still implemented by the Ministry of Economic Trade and Industry. So I want to ask that, well, Dr. Kimiko Hirata, you mentioned all those concerns that the civil society has on Japan. Is it possible that we can leverage, for instance, the GX promotion agency to make it more comprehensive? So that's a question from one of our participants. I will pause here, but I will continue to ask questions. But these questions is directed towards Director Kwon. Now, the ETS on the power sector. Now, one of the questions from the audience is that currently the ETS in South Korea at the same time regulates scope 1 direct use and also indirect use. Why would they do so? Would there be double allocation or double count because of that? Another audience also asks, also for our Korean speaker, even though the phase 4 ETS actually adopts the linear reduction, however, the government still assigned an MSR, which is a flexible mechanism for utilization. How do we avoid MSR not over interfering with the market while maintaining the effectiveness of the carbon price signals? So these are the two questions directed towards Director Kwon. I will give you maybe 1 minute to think about the questions, and I myself will answer one of the questions from the audience first. So you asked about the question whether or not these live streaming will stay online. Yes, we will stay on the YouTube channel of Environmental Rights Foundation. If you want to play back, welcome to go to the YouTube channel of the Environmental Rights Foundation. However, just a reminder, all the presentations and decks of the speakers will not be provided additionally. So if you want to check, please go to the YouTube of our Environmental Rights Foundation so that we get more views. All right. Next, I will want to invite Dr. Kimiko Hirata to answer the first question.
Yes, thank you very much for a good question. And I also try to read the Slido's question in Chinese to understand what's been said, and I found that one question that why Ministry of Environment are not part of it and then why Ministry of Economy are part of it, and that's one part of the answer to this question. Actually, Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, who actually was very negative view on ETS for a long time, was the one to communicate and persuade heavy industries and power sector to accept GX ETS, which is quite interesting. Ministry of Environment had been advocating for the carbon pricing, including the carbon tax and GX ETS, but in the discussion of the developing GX ETS, they were not part of the discussion. They were kicked out, and they were not even notified that it is going to be decided. So it's kind of, sectionalism issue exists in Japan, but this is also the reflection of how this very detailed, complicated system designed. So METI, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, has very strong and good relation with the heavy industries or big high-emitting companies, sharing their insights all the time each other. So how the emissions and benchmark standards are designed are Of course, under the government council council and subcommittees, but in the behind the scene, they have negotiated deeply each other. And so there are very limited space for other stakeholders to be able to part of the discussion. So many of us, basically, even the council members, are not really in the discussion of the actual decision making of the benchmark standards or the detailed schemes. GXAA under the government also has a function, but we don't know that how we can have access to as an outsider. So this is a really that is one reason that I said that transparency would be the key. The currently to kickstart, the government now verify together with the individual companies the emissions and decide the emissions allowances and then decide allocation. But how it is going to be decided by whom, we don't know it. And once it's decided how much we can get the information, we don't know it. Under the transition plan, emission projections or target actual emissions, status of the R&D investment will be disclosed. However, the capital investment plans or reduction measures or effects are not disclosed. So how much we can know about, the adequacy of the allowances is something that we need to see. So I cannot directly answer the question because it has not really fully operationalized, but this is a big challenge for the many stakeholders who are very keen to this system, that how much we can know and then understand the system credibility. And I think this is a challenge, but I think this is our role to play in this system to be fully operationalized in the good manner.
好，谢谢平田博士。
Thank you, Dr. Hirata. Thank you for your answer. And as you heard from the Japanese experience sharing, I have to say, well, in Taiwan, our Ministry of Environment, they are more involved and they are leading the discussion. Also, we have higher level of transparency. Next, I would like to invite Director Kwan to answer the question. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for your question. And so one of the special things for Korean ETS is that the Korean ETS only contains scope 2 emission in the operating the ETS system, unlike EU or the US. And that this is because that as you may know, the Korean electric power system is highly regulated by the Korean government. It means that the carbon price in wholesale electricity market is not reflected to the retail prices. So at the time, the Ministry of Environment decided to include scope 2, especially for the electricity emission, because there is no other options to for Korean many large emitters to encourage the renewable energy or energy efficiency. So that's the main reason why the scope 2 emission was included in Korean ETS. But as I said, the Korean government decided to increase the auction ratio for power sector from 10% to 50% by 2030, and after that, Korean government it's not official statement, but from the for the fifth phase, the Korean government would like to set the 100% the auction rate for the power sector. It means that there's no reason to include scope 2 emission in Korean ETS system. So I think after 2031, then there will be no regulations for the scope 2 emission in Korean ETS. And for the MSR, so MSR could be the important tool to stabilize the carbon price in Korean ETS, and that was the initial purpose for Korean government, because the people setting the initial pathway in fourth phase, there are huge opposition from the Korean industrial sector. This is too tough to meet the target. So introducing MSR is kind of a meditation or the result of a negotiation between the government and the industrial sector. But Korean civil society do not deny this result 100%, because but we demand recently that there's no clear governance system to monitor how to control the carbon price, because unlike a carbon fee or carbon tax, the in ETS system, the many informations are not disclosed, and most of the decision would be by the Korean government officials. So still we are trying to make some kind of a disclosure movement to open 100% information for Korean government. Yeah.
好，我们谢谢全总监的回答。那接下来
Thank you, Director Kwon, for your answer. And next, I would like to invite two panelists to answer the questions from the audience. And these are really sharp questions. So first of all, for Professor Shi and also Director General Tsai, can you answer a very simple question? After listening to the presentation in Japan and Korea, actually in implementing ETS, there are some problems and the results are not as expected. So how come you're so confident in implementing ETS in Taiwan? What is the source of confidence for you that we can achieve ETS as we planned? And in the Japanese as well as Korean experience, DG Tsai and Professor Shi, what are the things we should prevent or take extra cautions? Okay, my answer is, personally, I'm not a person of high confidence, but ETS and also, personally, I wouldn't say I'm very confident about it. Well, I think the key is really who are paying the fee, and the stakeholders, they present this self-determined carbon emission reduction plan for 5 years, and based on this plan they presented, as I look into the policy and the intervention, I think for the corporate side, the intervention is not all positive because it's not as stable as we might think. Minister of Environment, as he said, he is a pro-market person. It is true that we can rely on the power of the market to determine the price of carbon, and it can reflect the ambition of carbon emission for the corporate side. And in our alliance, some of the company, they price their carbon emission per ton at the price of $100 or even $300. So I think relying the market to determine the price, it's good for the companies who have great ambition to reduce their carbon emission. However, as we're still test running this ETS, then since it's test run, then it's not going to follow the textbook. If you look at the ETS, the carbon trade. So I think there will be some room for us to blend. What do I mean by blend? Meaning there's no double taxation, and we hope that it's not going to affect the revenue of our Green Transition Foundation. And if we can incorporate the self-determined carbon emission reduction plan, for example, their goal by 2030, and also their annual verification goal, then to some extent, for the corporate side, it's a good opportunity for them to understand the ETS system better and earlier, especially when it comes to carbon pricing, as they might not be involved. I mean, in carbon pricing system, they cannot be as evolved as in ETS. So I think that's the context for Taiwanese society. I hope I answer your question. Just now, like I said in my presentation, in Taiwan since 2015, we've been discussing the carbon pricing, whether we should go to the ETS approach or we use carbon taxation. Well, we spent a long time discussing, and it wasn't until 2023 when we have the Climate Change Response Act, once it was signified, then we started to introduce or advocate for this idea. I mean, we implement what we can do first. So we start with a carbon fee system. So to answer your question, how come we have this confidence? Well, it's not really that we are very confident in the system, but from our understanding of the carbon fee system, our plan lasts until 2030. And I think the real challenge is in 2035, when we are getting closer to the 2050 net zero goal, and in 2030, after that, we will have greater goal to reduce our carbon emission. So at this moment, whichever tool we are leveraging or strategy we are leveraging, if we only rely on carbon fee, even though the government can set the fee and we have the room to go up, and we receive recommendation from the Commission. However, for the government, when the authorities in charge, when they want to raise the carbon fee, I have to say I'm not really confident that we can implement the system as we planned implement this carbon fee system. So in the process, we have to take a proactive role that we refer to other countries' experience. For example, ETS is nevertheless an effective tool to reduce carbon emission from power sector. And however, ETS requires a very careful system design. So that is why we are currently soliciting public opinion to make this system design better. To implement system and also make it better, I think that takes a public brainstorming. And I want to emphasize that by 2030, certainly this is my goal, my vision, those companies covered in this plan, you have to pay the carbon fee, and also you have to reduce your carbon emission as you planned. And now we have 2015 net zero goal, and 2030, that's another threshold. And in the process, we need to test run, and we need further discussion of the system design. And certainly, we are very much inspired and supported by the experiences as we learn from Japan and Korea. So once we implement ETS, we wouldn't start with the 90% free allocation. We will rely on the basis of self-determined carbon emission reduction. So that is my answer to your question. Thank you, Dr. General Tsai, and also Professor Shi. Next. There are some questions online. The audience are curious about the Japanese and Korean experience. Among the three countries, in Taiwan, Japan, and Korea, we have vibrant semiconductor industry as well as AI industry. So one of the questions is, as the technology industry is growing so rapidly, and it's the same situation in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. So these technology sectors, they are taking much of electricity consumption. So especially in scope 2, the emission, the number will only go up. So my question to Japan and Korea is that in your ETS system, in setting the allocation or the allowance to this new technology sector, do you have any way, any tool to suppress or reduce the carbon emission from this technology sector to drive them, to incentivize them? So that's the first question. And second question, some audience would like to know, the two of you in your separate country, as you've been advocating for carbon fee system, is there an experience or tip that you can share with Taiwanese people that you can let the public raise their awareness that carbon fee is an important topic? How do you raise the public awareness of these topics? Is there any experience that you can share with us? Any tips? So these are the two questions for you. So may I have Director Kwan to answer?
Thank you for your question. AI and the data center is a quite hard issue in Korea too. So many high-tech companies demands huge volume of electricity to run their the facility, the existing facility, also the new facility. And last week, that Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix announced their new plan to build a huge capacity in the southern western region of Republic of Korea. Yeah, so it will cost a lot of the additional electricity, but also they announced their plan that they will build and they will operate their factory with the high portion of renewable energy, especially from the offshore and the solar power. So I think the impact from building the factory due to the AI syndrome will not affect the Korean ETS by 2030, I think, and their plan is constituted beyond 2035. So at this moment, I think there will be a little impact on the Korean ETS, and also in my slide, there is detailed information on the Korean ETS, and according to the allocation plan, there is a small amount of the allocation for the new reserve, like new installing or building new data center, something like that. But Korean government said that announced that there will be no increase for the new entrant, which means that if companies would like to build more factory or data center, there will be no increase for the new entrant. So it means that the Korean government can maintain the total cap and the total price. Yeah.
好，
All right. Next, for the same set of questions, I want to ask Dr. Kimiko Hirata, please.
Yes, thank you so much. This is also big issues, data center, AI, and emissions, while electricity demand sharp increase, how we can sustain our economy and then generate the electricity. This is a big issue. But under this, the GX ETS, basically it covers scope 1, direct emissions, and the companies under the emission over 100,000 tons of CO2 annually. So the companies emitting, AI tech, semiconductor companies, basically consume a lot of electricity. So it's not, as far as I understand, directly covered under the scheme, but if this is operationalized fully, the cost of electricity from fossil-based power company will go up if GX ETS function quite well. So indirectly, semiconductors or the factories will be affected by the GX ETS scheme through this system indirectly through the cost surge, but this is only when the GX ETS pricing mechanisms function fully. So at this stage, there are not the direct regulations to these, growing sector to limit the emissions in Japan. This is going to be a big issue, but so far the government kind of use this trend as an excuse for higher electricity demand in Japan, and then push more fossil-based power plants operationalize, and also utilize the nuclear power. So the government response is basically to, increase the capacity for the power generation, not to limit the demand side electricity consumption. So that is where we are at now.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Hirata, for your response. I think we've asked both speakers, the topic that we've asked our speakers are, in each of your countries, I think you have been advocating especially carbon pricing mechanism for a long time. So what are your tips and tricks in communicating with the general public and letting them know that it's very important to have carbon pricing? What's your experience? Can you share with Taiwan? What are the lessons learned? I will first, once again, ask Director Kwon to answer.
Yeah, thank you. This could be the last question. No? Okay, I think usually the carbon tax or carbon fee or ETS have their own pros and cons. Carbon tax is simple and clear, and the level of the carbon price will be determined by the law, and it means that there is plenty room to engage that process for determining the level of the carbon price as a civil society member. But for the ETS, there's a good thing that as you know, the ETS can be called like a cap and trade, and I think trading is kind of a supplementary tool. So most important thing is to set the proper level of the target and the cap. So, and the cap will, can be strongly linked to the NDC. So for the government, it is really it is easier to manage their annual target for achieving the NDC. So they have their own press. But I think there's another way to incorporate ETS and the carbon tax, because there are some countries which runs both the mechanism to achieve their NDC target. Like I know that the Denmark or northern the European countries are running both mechanism, because they run the ETS to manage their total cap according to the NDC, but they use the carbon-free system like a floor price system in ETS. So they would like to incorporate to both the different type of regulations to meet their target. Because I think, well, the Korean the carbon market had many problems to operate this system, because Korean market is so small compared to the market size of EU. So their market volatility is quite high. And I expect that if Taiwan decide to introduce the ETS, then considering the fact that the market size, then their market volatility could be high, and it means that the normal corporation companies cannot have a conviction to invest more on the renewable energy or energy transition large projects. So I think that could be another alternative solution to operate properly the carbon pricing mechanism in Taiwan, I think. Yeah.
好的，那我们谢谢。
All right. Thank you, Director Kwon, for your response. Next, I will now give the floor to Dr. Hirata, please.
Yes, the question, as I understood, is how to get engagement from general public.
Yes.
Right. I think this forum is very technical forum among experts talking about many technical jargon on EU ETS. Those who are interested in climate change but not really free in the ETS cannot really follow this discussion. But this is very important because very detailed system design matter to be the system very credible. But at the same time, it's very difficult to communicate with the general public. Those are very worried about the climate change, but we really need to get their engagement as well, because in order to avoid being manipulated the system of the ETS is we need political will to make this system function and then to achieve carbon neutral. So I think what we are trying to, what I understand my role as an organization is how we can interpret the system and these meanings to the public, and then try not to forget about the purpose of this system. When we go into very much in detail, we talk about many nitty-gritty things. Sometimes, even the industry who are in the discussion forget about purpose. But this is for emission reductions while maintaining the good business for the country's economic growth. So I think this interpretation is very, very important, connecting the purpose. So what we are trying to do is to crystallize the system as much as possible. How this, 60% of the total emissions is going to be reduced by this system, and how each company is, commit and then comply the system, how benchmark is going to be functioned, and then what is the outcome of this, and how far this gap will be compared to our objectives. I think that is very, very important to communicate with people, and then we need the people to be on our side to support, to improve the system or enhance the regulations or other systems to accelerate the emission reduction. And then probably this is my last, so I'd like to say that ETS or pricing on carbon is a very, very important scheme. It is going to be the central part of our the carbon policy, but it is also one of the policy package. We need, regulation or building. We need the transport, policies. So this is a combination. So I think how we can accelerate the emission reduction as a whole, and then we should see that how the ETS or pricing mechanism is in the system. I think this interpretation for connecting the people and the detailed system is very, very important, because this is for the carbon neutrality and for the people. Thank you.
好，
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Hirata, for your response. Because of time constraint, we will not be able to answer another round of questions. For the remaining question, I want to leave the floor to a person who hasn't been spoken yet, because many of the questions are directly addressed to our Japan and Korea speaker. So last but not least, I want to give the floor to researcher Lin and also Professor Liu. I will give them each 2 minutes to summarize. Yuxuan, please. All right. what we observe globally is that many of the carbon pricing mechanisms, as Professor Zhong mentioned, it try to incorporate the features of carbon tax and ETS so that it can avoid the flaws. We've actually translated a report saying that if we want the carbon pricing to be able to achieve a maximum effect by 2035, there are several precautions that we need to take into account. For instance, top-down approach in setting the cap will be more important, not focusing just on the intensity. And also there are other issues. Simply put, for instance, the carbon pricing and whether or not it's effective rely on the design details. However, for CSOs, we still worry that in terms of the design of ETS, there is still more room for the industries to lobby or make influence, and we don't want to see that happen. We recommend that in implementing and in piloting the system, we need to let different stakeholders to be engaged and involved so that we're able to get into the discussion of the design of the system. Thank you. All right, Professor Liu. I don't have much to add. I just want to echo what Professor Shi just said. That is the continuity of the policy. For these newly launched carbon fee system, they've just had their first collection, and we're now already discussing whether to transition to a different system. I think in terms of the rhythm of the policy, I'm not that confident either. So if I want to stand in the shoes of the companies, I would think that the policy is moving too fast, and we're not sure what's coming next in the future. I think the associations of the industry also say that it seems that maintaining carbon fee is actually a good option for them. And I think a lot of times I have different opinions with the association, but I think having continuity of the policy is also important so that companies are familiarize themselves of the policy. They can internalize this in their own company for some time. I think giving them some time to be acquainted would be something that can be of consideration. Once again, thank you very much for the rich forum. All right. Thank you, Professor Liu. And that's it for our panel discussion.
非常
So thank you for your participation online and offline. And again, thank you, Director Guan, and for coming all the way to Taipei. And also thank you, Dr. Hirata online. Thank you for joining us. And also Director General Cai, Professor Shi, Professor Liu, and also researcher Ms. Lin Yuxuan. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us. And just a gentle reminder, we are not going to share the documents or the slides today. Please come back to our YouTube channel to have a review if you want to know more about this discussion. So as we discuss a lot of, many aspects of the disadvantages of carbon trading. However, carbon fee and ETS, these are systems made by men. Even though you say, okay, you rely on market, but market is actually participated by men, by people. So in Japan and in Korea, there are an interest group. They are trying to lobby, leveraging political means to change or intervene the market system and the pricing. So this is a problem, actually, that whether we go to carbon fee approach or market approach. So if today we are overly concerned about the interest group and we are driven by them to leave behind the carbon fee system and go to ETS, then maybe the same problem will come again. So once again, thank you very much, and this concludes today's program. Thank you very much.
全总监，我们留步，我们一起上台上的语坛人跟讲者一起拍张大合照。
you.